Okay. Hi, my name is Alexei. I'm a PhD student and research assistant at the Imperial College in London. And today I'll talk about interoperability with cryptocurrency-backed assets. Now, specifically, I'll present our latest protocol, Crossclaim. We have a paper accepted at the IEEE S&P conference, and we have our code online if you want to check that out. Now, just please don't use it yet, because it's not completely finished. So this is joint work with my colleagues from Imperial College, and it's sponsored by Pew Research, Outlive Ventures, and Blockchain. So the motivation behind this talk is pretty much straightforward, right? We have over 2,000 cryptocurrencies, which differ in design and purpose, and what we want to achieve is trustless and scalable cross-chain communication, because we assume there won't be one blockchain to rule them all in the end. Now, I think we can all agree to some extent that we've had a history of theft and loss in cryptocurrencies, and they're mostly related to centralized providers. Now, as a counter-movement, decentralized exchanges have appeared. A super idea, however, to this date, the adoption is still quite low, and most of them only operate on Ethereum and use ERC20 tokens, so they're not really cross-chain yet. So, to this date, it seems that atomic cross-chain swaps with HTLCs remain the only mechanism to do cross-chain communication. And they've been around since 2012. Now, there must be a reason why the adoption is not that high yet. And I will assume that most of you know how HTLCs work. I won't have time to explain. But the main problem, I guess, is that all parties must be online throughout the process. Plus, we also need an out-of-band channel to exchange so-called revocation transactions, because otherwise, our funds may be locked up forever if one of the parties crashes. Furthermore, all parties must monitor all involved blockchains to be sure that they act at the right moment. Otherwise, well, you could lose your funds, even if the protocol goes correctly. And finally, maybe a problem more interesting to developers is there's no standardized interface for HTLCs. Even in Bitcoin, there's like different formats you can use. You can also use scriptless scripts and so on. So all in all, this is kind of a cool idea. It's been around for some time, but it's not really gaining traction, at least yet. So the idea behind cryptocurrency-backed assets is very simple. That we want to lock up coins on the backing blockchain, for example, Bitcoin, and issue a one-to-one representation on an issuing blockchain, for example, Ethereum. And the process is very simple, and the idea itself has been floating around ever since Ethereum was launched. So we lock Bitcoin, we create one-to-one backed assets on Ethereum, and then we can actually use them to make decentralized exchanges actually cross-chain, to have cross-chain payment channels in Ethereum, because essentially then any payment channel becomes cross-chain, right? And we can use the smart contract functionality of Ethereum to build more potent atomic swaps. Now, finally, when we're done with all these cool features, we say we want to go back to Bitcoin, and then we destroy the tokens and ideally receive back Bitcoin. Now, the challenge is, well, Bitcoin has no idea that something like that happened on Ethereum. It cannot validate the state of Ether. And yeah, so what do we do? The first what comes to our mind is, well, can we use hash smart contracts? And this will be very nice, but we can't really generate secrets in Ethereum smart contracts, which is one problem. And the other problem is you don't really know who is going to own the token when you generate the HTLC in Bitcoin. So what you will have is a race between all people who see the secret and then want to get the Bitcoin back from the Bitcoin side. So we do need some kind of intermediary in Bitcoin. And before everyone leaves the room, let me show you how we can do this trustlessly. Now, yeah, so if we look at our system model, we have a requester who locks coins and issues tokens. We have the redeemer who then wants to go back to Bitcoin, send the receiver is quite simple. And the interesting part is the vault. The vault is responsible for redeeming on the backing blockchain, specifically on Bitcoin. However, it's non-trusted and it's collateralized. And the smart contract that is deployed on Ethereum is responsible for the whole process of issuing, trading, redeeming. Basically, every action that you do goes through the smart contract. And this way can also enforce honest behavior of the vault. Now, if you briefly look at the smart contract, I won't have time to go through all the components. If you want to have a look, you can check out the paper. But the most important one and how we actually achieve trustlessness is the chain relay. Now, for those of you who don't know what a chain relay is, a chain relay can be understood as a cross-chain SPV or light client. And the idea is quite simple. You want to be able to verify transaction inclusion proofs for another blockchain on Ethereum, for example. And for Bitcoin, there is a thing called BTC relay, which has been around since, I think, 2016. Now, how it works is you submit block headers to the contract checks if the difficulty adjustment is correct, it checks if there's any forks, and then if a user submits a transaction, and a Merkle path to the identifier of that transaction in the Merkle tree of the block header, it can actually verify programmatically that yes, this transaction was indeed in a Bitcoin block. Now, there is a few things you need to think about when implementing this, and I'll refer you to the paper. There's a few sections where we discuss the security assumptions here. But before we continue with the protocols, one thing to mention are the system requirements. So we know that we need smart contracts on Ethereum. However, the goal of this project was to make sure that we do not need anything on the backing blockchain. So basically, we can support Bitcoin. And the cool thing is we only need to be able to make transactions. That's it, nothing else. Now, obviously, if we would have smart contracts on the backing blockchain, it would make things a bit more practical. We could get rid of the intermediaries or at least use them as an optimization. The question is, how do we keep the two contracts up to sync? And that does introduce a few challenges. Now, let's have a look at the protocols. So in the first step, we see, okay, we have the smart contract deployed up there. It's this treasury box. We have the BTC relay. And we have the vault and Alice, who has Bitcoin and wants to go on Ethereum and get her Bitcoin there. Now, as a precondition, obviously, the vault must lock up some collateral on Ethereum. And in this case, we over-collateralize the vault to mitigate for exchange fluctuations, but I'll talk to that a bit later. And the amount of collateral the vault locks up here defines how many Bitcoin-backed tokens users can securely issue with this vault. Now, do note that any user can become a vault. So basically, anyone who has Ether can go and say, okay, look, I'm locking up Ether. Here's my Bitcoin address. You can use me to issue Bitcoin-backed tokens. What Alice will do then is she will send the Bitcoin to the vault and then provide an inclusion proof to the BTC relay that this transaction happened on Bitcoin. And the BTC relay verifies that this transaction has happened, confirms to the smart contract that this is the case, and the contract will then issue the corresponding amount of tokens to Alice. Now, notice one thing. The vault can be offline throughout this whole issuing process. As soon as there's collateral locked up in the contract, there's nothing else to do for the vault. That means no one can really prevent Alice from issuing these tokens at the moment, right? So this is a cool feature we have. Now, the only challenge, of course, is Alice will only want to issue if there is collateral in the contract. But we do have some race conditions which we need to fix first. The most important one is we'll assume Alice and Carol try to send Bitcoins to the vault for the same amount of collateral simultaneously. In the end, only one of them will have the security of being basically secured by collateral, and the other one will have just given away the Bitcoin for free. Furthermore, the vault, it's not the issuer, but the vault, sorry for that, can try to withdraw the collateral from the contract before Alice can finalize the process. And this can be done, well, he can attack Alice with a denial of service attack. This can be due to latency, and so on. Now, and for this, we introduce two simple but quite effective mitigations. The first one is that we don't allow the vault to withdraw the collateral instantly, but it must first announce the withdrawal in the contract, wait for a period where users can finalize their issue requests, and then withdraw. So users will know that once the vault has announced that it's withdrawing collateral, that it's risky to actually send Bitcoin there. And the second one is to prevent two users from racing for the same amount of collateral. We use collateralized issue commitments. And specifically, Alice must first pre-commit herself in the contract to issuing these Bitcoin-backed tokens. Now, obviously, so the rest of the protocol stays the same. However, to prevent a malicious user from going to the contract and filling it with orders, but never issuing, we require that Alice provides minimal collateral. So if you actually try to take down the contract and block a vault from being used by people, you will have to pay for that. Now, swaps and transfers are really simple, and you can exploit the smart contract functionality with Ethereum here, which gives you quite a big benefit over Bitcoin. Now, let's assume in this process, Bob got some Bitcoin-backed tokens from Alice, and now Bob wants to go back to Bitcoin. So what does he do? He locks the Bitcoin back with a contract, and the contract will emit an event signaling to the vault that now is the time to send the Bitcoin back to Bob. Notice that this is the first time when the vault actually has to do something. So the vault will observe this event and send back the Bitcoin to Bob. And then it will provide an inclusion proof to the BTC relay showing that it behaved correctly. So basically, we enforce a proof or punishment approach. If the vault does not give a proof, it will be slashed. And in the end, then the collateral is released to the vault. Now, obviously, as mentioned, if the vault misbehaves, if it does not react, it is slashed and Bob is reimbursed. Since there can be multiple vaults in the system, Bob then can retry the process with another vault. Now, basically what happens with the guarantee we give you is that you will either get back your Bitcoin or you will just have executed a quite beneficial exchange of Bitcoin versus Ether, well, and then you can buy the Bitcoin again, because obviously we will punish the vault for misbehavior as well. Now, one thing you probably think about is, well, but what about exchange rates? And this is kind of a challenge we have to face. So what we have to do is we must try to mitigate possible exchange rate fluctuations. And for this, we, as mentioned, we over-collateralize the vault, and we introduce a three-stage collateralization scheme, where we say, for example, so I have some example exchange rate, example thresholds on the right side. So let's assume we say that the ideal over-collateralization rate is 2.0. That means you have to provide twice the value of Ether for the locked Bitcoin. Now, as long as the threshold is exceeded, the vault can withdraw the collateral, users can issue new assets. Now, let's assume someone has issued assets for the vault, but then the price of Ether starts dropping compared to Bitcoin. Now, obviously, the smart contract will no longer allow the other users to issue new tokens with the vault because the rate is below the ideal collateralization rate, and the vault is kind of asked to provide more collateral. Because if it does not, at some point, the rate might go so low that the contract will trigger automatic liquidation to prevent users from making a loss. And the liquidation can be triggered by the user himself, by any user in the system, or depends how the oracle is implemented that provides the exchange rate. Now, the goal here is to ensure that we maintain the incentives for the vault to behave honestly as long as possible. And if actually something goes wrong, we make sure that the users get their Ethereum back at least. Now, we have a few properties that we show in the paper, but I'll just highlight three of them, specifically consistency. So we only issue the tokens if you provide a proof for the Bitcoin transaction. We ensure that you either get back your Bitcoin or the corresponding amount of Ether. And finally, we have liveness. Specifically, you don't need any third party to actually participate in Xclaim because anyone can become an intermediary. Furthermore, as soon as a vault locks up collateral, there's nothing it can do except try to withdraw it again. But in the meantime, users can do whatever they want. And the vault cannot censor selective users and prevent them from issuing Bitcoin back tokens, which is a great advantage over centralized providers. Now, we implemented Xclaim in Solidity, and yeah, we deployed it on Robston. One thing that we had to do is we used the old Serpent implementation of BTC Relay, which is, Serpent is quite outdated, so we're working on a new implementation of BTC Relay in Solidity. And you can check out the code on GitHub. We're currently 2 people who are implementing this, and yeah, we're researchers, so if you want to help out, please do. So if you look at performance and costs, yeah, please do note that they're probably lower right now because we used a slightly higher exchange rate back then. But as we can see, today, the whole process of issuing an arbitrary amount of Bitcoin-backed tokens, performing an atomic swap in an Ethereum smart contract, and then redeeming them costs you less than $1, which is actually quite nice. Now, we do note something is not on the slides, and that's the cost of maintaining BTC Relay. And back at the date when we were testing this, it cost approximately $27 per day to keep the relay up to date with Bitcoin blocks. Now, obviously, the first version of the BTC Relay was not optimized, and the Serpent language was deprecated, so the new version is cheaper. Plus, the more users participate in Xclaim, the less the cost for a single user for the verification costs. And we're also working on improving BTC Relay with better techniques like NipoPows and Fly clients to cut the costs even lower. And yeah. Now we also compare our implementation to H2C atomic swaps between Bitcoin and Ether. And what we see is that we're actually way faster and significantly cheaper. And the reason is that we do the slow setup between Bitcoin and Ethereum exactly once, and then we can do the swaps as often as we like. Whereas in HTLCs, you have to do the tiresome process of setting up the channel between Bitcoin and Ether, between 2 parties, each and every time. So obviously, this is still a first proof of concept, and there's a few challenges to solve. One, as mentioned, is the feasibility of chain relays. So we're looking into off-chain verification games like TrueBit and Arbitrum, for example, which was presented at Usenix last year. We're also looking at compact proofing techniques, and thinking of how we can combine game theoretic approaches with potential zero-knowledge proofs where we have a fallback if the game basically breaks. Now, we're also working on multi-signatures to prevent theft of Bitcoins altogether, because right now, the vault controls the Bitcoin, which is kind of a problem, you could argue. So what we're doing right now, we're working on locking the assets in a multi-sig with the user, but then there's a few additional steps you have to do on the Ethereum side, and it becomes really feasible if you use off-chain channels. So this is currently work in progress. And finally, we're also looking at how to better incentivize the market of vaults and trying to figure out how to get rid of the problem of centralized exchange-rate oracles, trying to distribute trust among different providers, or potentially in the long term, using the rates of Bitcoin-backed assets against Ether as an additional data source. That's it. Thanks. And if you have any questions, please do. Yeah. We also have a short summary of this on our website, and we have an ETH research post as well.
All right, thanks Alexei. It's really nice. I had a couple questions. One of them was, so yeah, I mean, just in terms of how do you trust the BTC relay? Obviously, that's like an availability assumption. Also, I'm not. They actually verify the proof of work in the relay, if I'm correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, so yeah, you do have to kind of trust that the BTC relay is up to date. Now, since it's a public contract, you will see if something goes wrong. But we discussed in the paper that obviously you could launch a poisoning attack or a selfish mining attack on the relay. What you could also do, you could try to prevent users from submitting new transactions, but that's kind of difficult because you'd have to censor the whole network. But one major problem, and this is kind of a challenge we have to solve to make this scalable among different blockchains, is that we have to verify the proof of work in the relay itself. And for example, for scrypt, this does not work because it will cost you over 100 Ether blocks to verify one scrypt block because it's not supported per default. Oh, yeah. So there's been a lot of work, for example, by Jason Teutsch and Dan Boney to get this into bulletproofs. So yeah, we're looking forward. So we're actually trying to work together with them and to bootstrap this. Yeah.
Okay, cool, yeah.
Hi. So you mentioned the verification of the proof of work in the BTC relay. How does it work for a proof of stake protocol? Is there solutions?
So we discussed how this could work for proof of stake in the paper a bit, but there's a recent paper at S&P as well this year, which is called Proof of Stake Sidechains, which I can recommend you to look at. But in principle, for proof of stake, there's a slight difference. So instead of tracking the difficulty adjustment and verifying the proof of work, you'd have to know when the epochs happen of the staking periods, and you'd have to follow the stake, right? So you'd have to know which validators are selected each round. The verification then is easier because you just check the signatures, but yeah, we'll have to see how easy it is to implement that. But in principle, my gut feeling is that it's probably cheaper to do it. Yeah, for proof of authority blockchains, it's quite simple because you know the set of the validators up front. In proof of stake, it can change, right? And that's where you need to really be careful so you don't allow an old validator set to sign transactions, yeah.
All right. Oh, one more question?
Yeah, I also want to point out, it's really similar, your idea of the vaults, they're basically like sort of MakerDAO collateralized debt positions in the sense of like having the over liquidation, the over collateralization of basically a promise of like a locked token on another chain. And one of the issues I was like wondering, I was trying to understand, what do you think the finality time, like parameter basically, is suitable enough to like, yeah, sustain itself against, I guess, large chain reorgs? So like, you know, about 100 blocks down the line?
So this is of course a big problem, but so we must make the assumption that both chains we're connecting kind of operate securely. If you want to be really sure, you can obviously add longer contestation periods, but the problem is, for example, what happens if a hard fork happens, right? Then you must update the relay to track the new chain. And if you have a 100-block reorg, I mean, it will break, but you'll have other problems as well. It's like, it's hard to say. Basically, the security model of the underlying chain is broken. But yeah, it's an open problem, yeah.
Okay,
yeah. All right, thank you very much. I think we'll go on coffee break, and then we'll be back in 20, 25 minutes. Thank you.